Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of Portsmouth City Council Cabinet. If we quickly run round the room just so everybody introduces themselves so people know who we are. Just in terms of housekeeping, no fire alarm expected, so if it is, it's real, meet at Victoria. And there is a live streaming, I don't think, it's pointing in this direction, so if members of the public are in the gallery, you won't be filmed, but everybody else will be. Shall we quickly go around and introduce everybody? Gail, do you want to start?
Yes, Gail Hancock. I'm the Interim Deputy Director for Children's Services.
Peter Bill, Deputy City Solicitor.
Chris Ward, Director of Finance.
David Williams, Chief Executive.
Michael Lawther, City Solicitor.
Joe Miles-Smith, Democratic Services.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Deputy Leader of the Council, Cabinet Member for Culture, Leisure and Sport.
Joe Van Jackson, Leader of the Council and Chair of this committee.
Jeanette Smith, Cabinet Member for Resources, and welcome Gail to Cabinet.
You stole my thunder. Welcome, Gail. Rob Wood, Cabinet Member for Children and Families.
Susie Horton, Cabinet Member for Education.
Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member for T&T.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environment and Community Safety.
And Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much indeed. So, apologies for absence. As I understand it, both Matt Whittington and Ben Dowling can't be with us because of work commitments. Colleagues, any declarations of interest? Nope. Record of previous decisions on the 12th of March 2019. Colleagues, are you happy with those minutes? Yep. Darren?
Just two bits just to tidy some stuff up, really. In the bottom paragraph of page 9, the final line, it's the final sentence. All of the rising recommendations except number 3 were supported. I think in your speech you wanted us to support recommendation 3, so that's just a factual thing. And then in the decisions that are taken, again, just some factual stuff, really, just to reflect what we agreed. In recommendation 2, it talks about with the modification on recommendation 3. I would just replace that with the words including, because that just stresses the fact that we accepted all the report's recommendations. Just a bit of factual clarification in line, I think, with what you said, Gerald.
Thank you. Joe, are you happy with that?
Yes, that would be taken on into account.
Okay, thank you. And I think Darren's right. That's a reflection of the events. Okay. Anything else, colleagues, on that? Nope. Thank you. And Darren, thanks for keeping an eye on that and making sure we were correct. Colleagues, I think we may have a discussion about the two planning issues, and I know that Toby will be upset, but can we put them to the end to see if we can run through the rest of it fairly quickly? So that's items 4 and 5. Because I'm very sorry, I've got to appear in front of Select Committee in the Commons at 4, which means I need to be on the 1:50 train, which means I'm out of here at 1:40. I know Steve enjoys planning, so he may have to do the planning bits. Does that fill you with joy?
Absolutely.
Good. Rob? Yeah.
Chair, I also have to leave by 1:45 because
Excellent.
I have a meeting.
Okay, so let's move along. Items, colleagues, are you happy with that? Yes. Okay, item 6, revenue budget monitoring quarter 3. Chris, thanks so much indeed for the report. Anything you need to add to this?
Very brief introduction, conscious of time. As you can see, the report takes us to the end of December, so third quarter, December 2018. Sets out the proposals to deal with the approved budget amendment that went to council back in February, and how to decrease the budget by £2.5 million. Two proposals. The first one is to reduce the capital programme by 1.4 million. The other proposal is to transfer from portfolio reserves of 1.1 million, making up the total balance of 2.5. Having dealt with the 2.5 million, the overall forecast for the year now is a forecast overspend of 0.8 million. The main overspends are set out in a table in page 113. The big overspending areas are both adults and children's social care. That was deliberately budgeted for within the contingency at revised estimate stage, so it's fully funded from the contingency, leaving the remaining variances as the items that are causing the overall £0.8 million forecast overspend. If we do end the year with a £0.8 million forecast overspend, general reserves will have actually improved from 20.6 million at the start of the year and end the year at 22.2 million, which is an improvement of 1.6 million. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, colleagues. Thank you very much indeed for that. Chris, colleagues, are you happy with this suggestion? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Item 7, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance Guidelines on Anti-Semitism. Item 7, Steve, I think you're more of the expert on this than I am. Do you want to quickly introduce this?
Nothing major to add, except that we just want to check with Michael that what we're adopting is the actual guidelines and not the motion as a whole, which included other bits and pieces. It's the guidelines we're adopting, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, colleagues, are you happy with that? Okay, thank you very much indeed. The next bit then is item 8, is Sister City link with Sillett. Now, I don't know if people have got in their pack. Yes, we got a letter from them on page 135, letter from the Mayor of Sylhet. It seemed to me sensible to see if we can have a link with Sylhet in Bangladesh. It's the city and the area where a large proportion of the Bangladeshi community in Portsmouth live, and to have this as an area where we can do some work for economic development, to improve trade, and bring economic prosperity both to Portsmouth and to Sylhet is the right thing to do. And so I'm happy to suggest it's good to have a letter from the Mayor of Sylhet saying that he thinks this is the right thing to be doing as well. I understand it's a Cabinet decision, so are you happy with that, Jeanette?
Yeah, I just need to sort of speak on this because there is a slight movement away from what normally happens with sister links and sort of twinning, because this one actually sits in economic development, which I actually think is a way forward, and there will be a report coming after PERDA to sort of look at that. The other thing to note is in 3.11, there are no funds for this, and it's to make sure that the two people that deal with all the twinning and sister links and various things in between on this sort of subject, we resource it properly, and that will be in the paper too, because there are no finances, and that could cause problems as it's starting to with all the events that are coming up in the next year.
Yeah. Okay, that's sensible warning. Okay, with that proviso, colleagues, are you happy with that? And that we write back to the Mayor to see if we can make sure that this progresses and becomes an official link. I don't view this as a thing where mayors are flying to each other, etc. I think this is about economic development and work like that. And now most things can be done via Skype and the internet, and so I think we can do good close links without having to spend a great deal of money. Colleagues, are you happy with that? Thank you. Forward plan omission, for which my apologies. There are two things that we'd like to do. One is the open access youth provision, and the other is notification of trees on the highway. Sorry?
Not the same thing.
Okay, what have I done wrong?
The trees isn't a full plan omission, that's an information item.
Oh,
it's only the
10.
Okay.
first one.
So you're not Joe, you're not interested in trees?
I'm very interested.
Okay, well, note Joe's lack of interest in trees. So are you happy for us to look at this, even though the youth service one is an omission from the forward plan? Yes, thank you. So, open access youth provision. The reason this has come forward, ladies and gentlemen, is we've had many discussions, and I think rightly so, that there is significant concern around the city about things for young people to be able to, constructive things for young people to be able to do. And the City Council, because of the decisions that have been made in the past, has protected the youth service in areas where there's council housing, because the youth centres were moved into the council housing revenue account. And so in Portsea, in Somerstown, in Paulsgrove and Wimmering, and in Buckland, that service has continued. But in much of the rest of the city, both in the south of the city and the east of the city, there has been very little or no open access youth provision available for people, for young people. We're therefore wanting to make sure that we provide that, not directly through the council itself, but through working with the voluntary organisation, the voluntary sector. And so we've been able to find some money. So it's £250,000 a year for 2 years to be able to provide open access youth services for people, for young people in the city. And I'm incredibly grateful, and I wish to place on record my thanks to everybody who's been financially flexible in terms of being able to do it. I know officially it comes out of the Environment and Community Safety portfolio, but actually everybody has chipped in to try to make sure this happens, and I am very, very grateful to all members of the Cabinet for that. So I hope that what we'll be seeing through this year, and the plan is to make sure that it's up and running for the summer holidays, is that there are constructive things for young people to be able to do. Personally, I think a lot of sports-based stuff works really, really well, and the experience of it in the past has been very good. And I'm very grateful to people for their flexibility with that. But Gail, would you like to add something, or tell me I've said something wrong, or introduce it, and then we'll come to other colleagues?
Okay, I'm very happy to introduce it. I don't think you said anything wrong.
That's highly unlikely, but
and if you had, I wouldn't say so. So this is an item, as you have outlined, to propose to commission local voluntary sector organisations to provide an open access youth provision. I think you've covered all of the issues regarding the geography of where that will be targeted. It will be building on the open access and playground provision already aligned with council housing, and it's really important that we look to align that. The aim is to help vulnerable young people to keep them safe and well. Part of that is about building trusted adult worker relationships, providing assertive outreach into the community, and to ensure that there is that constructive programme of activities. We are looking, subject to agreement today and procurement, to get this up and running as soon as possible for the summer holidays, which is a really important time in the calendar for young people, particularly when the schools are out over their summer break. And it is focusing on sporting and physical activity, but also looking at cultural issues and the arts as well.
Brilliant. Thank you much, Gail. Colleagues, would you like to add anything? Nope. Okay. Darren?
Just a few observations, Gerald. Firstly, as the Cabinet member who's basically the Cabinet member for youth services at the moment, I'm absolutely delighted that this report is coming. Because there is some excellent work going on housing estates at present, and I'm delighted that we're going to be able to build on it for the whole city. Issues around young people just don't stop at the boundaries of housing estates. They occur everywhere. I know that from my own ward, and there's lots of places in the east of the city, and in old Portsmouth, for instance, where there's lots of low-level antisocial behaviour, and the sort of integrated approach that occurs on housing estates there will help. I'm delighted that we're able to start bringing back a citywide youth service, because I know that's one of the main ways in which we can make teenagers in particular, and the sort of teenagers you've rightly identified in this report, lead better lives. And that means a better city for everyone, not just people living on housing estates. Well done, Gerald.
Thank you. Not collective thing. Colleagues, are you happy with this? I think people in Milton, where I represent, will be overjoyed to see some of this happening, and I'm sure the same is true in Baffins, in Southsea, in Drayton and Follington, Copner, everywhere. Okay, thanks very much indeed. Okay, item 11. I know it's only for information, but I think this is important because I get lots of moans about this, because Colas, who have the contract to look after trees on the highway, come along and chop down trees. And when they did it to me, and we have a tree next door, they didn't bother telling me. And the same, I think, happens with many other residents. So Councillor Steve Pitt has produced a new way of doing stuff within the parks area to try to make sure that local residents get to know if there's proposals to fell a tree. This is to try to make sure that if there is a suggestion of chopping down a tree on a road, local residents get to know about it before it happens and have the ability to influence that. So I'm very grateful to everybody of this. So the suggestion is that that Colas will put a sign on the tree, like with cable ties. They're not going to hammer it in, but with cable, like we do with planning applications, you know, the green laminated notices, to say what the proposal is to do with this tree, what the reason for doing it is, what the replacement tree will be like, when it will be happening, and how can people contact if they're concerned about this. So we get a lot of people moaning a great deal when trees go in their road and nobody has bothered to talk to them. And it's gone on for years, and I'm pleased that we're looking as if we're going to have a system which will let people know that this is going to be addressed. I've got Lynn and Jeanette.
Yeah, I think this is very welcome, because Colas in the past have put notices out saying tree works, and with no indication,
Yeah.
and this happened in, I think it's one of Councillor Stubbs' it's Councillor Stubbs here, he was.
Yes.
In one of the roads, Allen's Road, I think, and they were planning on chopping down the trees. I mean, there were good reasons for it, but the residents were in uproar about it. So I think to clarify it is much, much better. Thank you.
Jeanette?
This report, yes, is for information only, and it quite rightly focuses on felling of trees. Is there going to be a report on actually putting in trees, and residents are now starting to ask why trees aren't put in roads? So is there plans to do that?
My understanding is that already happens, because there's a budget for putting in trees each year within the Colas contract, which the council stumps up with. If we want, we can. I think it's a sensible thing to do, to say how do people influence what trees go in, and what sort and where they might want them. It's very simple, because I know Ben has been working very hard to get Ben Downing has been working very hard to get as many trees as possible in all over the place. Susie.
Just to say that all councillors were sent something before Christmas, it's probably worth doing again, but where we were sent a map of our wards and asked to identify areas, because I engaged with some of the local residents on that, and actually it has happened, and it's really positive feedback, but it probably could happen again at regular intervals, but we were sent that map.
Lynn.
Can I also mention that they get put in redundant build-outs rather than the build-outs being taken out in order to create extra parking?
So we've got a request for you for two trees in the highways in Milton coming to you in a minute. Okay, colleagues, are you happy with this? Yep, thank you very much indeed. I hope it will mean that local residents get to know what is planned and have the ability to influence it. Because normally if you tell people, okay, this tree is diseased, we're taking it out, but we're putting another one in, people are on the whole fairly happy. But actually it's letting residents know, and so they can comment. All right, Lynn, sorry.
Can I just add another thing, and that is when trees have to be cut back quite a lot, because again we've had a lot of complaints. I think they were in parks, actually not on the road, but we've had a lot of complaints from residents when trees were cut down around the Baffins Pond area, and it was for sensible reasons in order to allow the trees to grow, but it's excessive pruning as well. It's not just taking them out.
And I think Steve's picked that up in the parks bit already, so it's been useful learning. Okay, folks, well we got through that remarkably quickly. So thank you very much indeed for that. Can we then go back to item 4, which is the Housing Targets, Housing Supply and Authority Monitoring Report. Item 4, and I have both Judith and Luke want to come and talk on that. So welcome, colleagues. And Paul, I'm sure you'll introduce it. Oh no, Toby. Toby, should we do your introduction first and then ask Judith and Luke to follow that, if that's all right? Because your introduction might allay some concerns they may have, but let's start it that way round. Okay. Toby, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. So my name's Toby Aileen. I'm Planning Policy Manager at the Council. I'm joined by Daniel Young, who wrote the Authority Monitoring Report, which is part of this item, and Paul Barton, who's the Interim Assistant Director of City Development.
Okay. Fire away.
Okay, thank you. Well, still mindful of time, I'll try and keep to the main points. But the report you have in front of you is mainly to update members on issues around national housing targets, our local housing supply, as well as what's been happening in the city over the period to the 31st of March 2018, which we have to record formally and set out in our authority monitoring report. I'll finish with the recommendations, but I'll just go through the report in order. First of all, the report sets out some background where we are preparing a new local plan for the city to run to 2036, but in the meantime, obviously, we are dealing with planning issues on a daily basis. We're dealing with issues around balancing of needs, balancing of housing and other requirements in the city. And this is all happening against the background of changing government policy on planning for housing. And I know there's name-checked here a number of reports that have kept cabinets updated on that issue as it's played out. Government has now published I'll start again, forgive me. Government's now published results of a housing delivery test, which includes an issue with the confirmed changes to national planning policy, which sets out, in effect, a new figure for housing needs that us and other local authorities should be addressing, as well as considering how we've met those needs so far, and then that also has implications for our housing supply going forward. So that's setting it out. Taking this first, the publication of the housing figures means that we're now able to complete this authority monitoring report. In other words, the monitoring report to 31st of March 2018, publication of that report has been withheld until now because we didn't know what targets we may be assessed upon and how to treat the delivery of certain housing, such as student housing. So we've been sat on that report for a number of months, waiting to be able to complete it. The housing delivery test was supposed to be published in November. It was finally published on the 19th of February. So that's where we're now in a position to complete that report, despite it being some time ago.
So just make sure I got this right, that the government has only just set the test for things that were completed almost a year ago, up to March 2018. Is that yes, no, or otherwise?
Broadly, yes. There are certain elements which are more important here than in other local authority areas, which mean that we have had to wait, the key of which is student housing, but we'll return to that as we go.
Fine. Okay.
So, turning to that report, the Authority Monitoring Report, it sets out basically two main things: what development and other things have happened within the city over that 12-month period, as well as our progress in planning policy and what we're doing as a local planning authority. Without going through all of the bullet points of the headlines here, I was just going to pick out a couple which are really around, because we're now able to understand our delivery and so on and so forth. The main bullet point I would suggest is bullet point 2 under paragraph 3.6, which points out that although the planning team are doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is constantly looking for opportunities for development to meet the city's needs, this new figure of housing need the government has confirmed now means that we cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing supply going forward. If we were calculating our supply against the old plan figure, the currently adopted figure, then we'd have over 7 years on the current basis. But the increase in target, the increase in need that we're assessed against has made the difference. I don't want to discount all the other bullet points in this. The Authority Monitoring Report covers a number of very important issues, but I think that given the time, I'll move on and take that as read unless there's any individual questions, and move on with the rest of the report. So paragraph 3.8 onwards talk about the housing delivery test. This is a new initiative by government to assess the delivery of new housing. It contains two elements, which is housing delivery, and that includes these nationally produced ratios for the delivery of student accommodation and other communal accommodation. In other words, what's the equivalent housing or dwelling figure for that, as well as the housing requirement for those years. And in the context of this delivery test, forgive me, but this is its own thing, its own bespoke thing, that requirement is made up of a mixture of old local plan targets, new household projections, and increasingly new local plan targets coming through. So that target that we have been assessed on is a sort of moving feast, and you see that in the body of the report there. So there's housing delivery and housing requirement. One divided by the other gives you a ratio. If you achieve less than 95% of that test, then there are certain sanctions which fall into place, such as depending on how far your shortfall is, you have to produce a local authority housing action plan to address under delivery, and the further away it falls, there are planning sanctions so that you end up placing less and less weight on the local plan as a whole. The results of where we are now are at the top of page 5 in the graph, in the chart, sorry. There are three elements to it. The black line shows that changing requirement we've been assessed against, and then the bars show two elements. The darker bars along the bottom, the darker element, that shows, if you like, the housing delivery. The lighter element above shows the equivalent amount that the government says we can count for student housing. So what this shows overall is that we have actually exceeded our requirement, according to this test, by 22%. But I must stress that it's only because of that quite favourable, in many ways, actually, ratio of student housing that we've been allowed to be given. In fact, it's not allowed, it is just published by the government. So that's what we've been given. Obviously, we can't rely on that in the future, or we may not want to anyway. But the point is that the publication test does give us a formal position now on this vexed question of how the planning system might treat student housing, if not actually meeting housing needs within the city, and also regards to how it can count towards its overall delivery. I was then going to go on and mention about where we are with the what that means then for our target. The student housing is a current short-term issue. More important for us for the local plan is the government's confirmation that this housing requirement need figure has been set at currently 863 homes per annum. And that is what local planning authorities, ourselves and others, using that methodology, will be expected to do what they can to meet. This is not our housing target now, it is the need to which we are expected to show willing in the production of the local plan to deliver. If we cannot show through our local plan that that can be delivered sustainably and technically and realistically, then that is something that then we're expected to talk to our neighbours about under duty to cooperate. That section also includes a table that just, again, for members, just compares the current sort of the various housing figures that have been bandied about over the last sort of 18 months through various methodologies, comparing the existing adopted plan, previous work that we've done, and the standard methodology, with a small thing to say that because of the inputs to that, we may get a slightly different figure in the coming weeks to come, but it will be around that 863 figure. In other words, much higher than previous estimates indeed. Looking at that then, we've looked at this delivery test. We now have a supply test to consider, so that looks forward 5 years and to see whether we can demonstrate we have a 5-year supply of housing. We're expected to maintain a 5-year supply of housing and publish an update to that each year, which we've been doing in our authority monitor report. Because the adopted plan is over 5 years old, the National Planning Policy Framework requires that housing supply is measured against this new standard methodology figure. So instead of measuring against 584 dwellings a year, as we used to be, we're now measuring against 863. And as I've said, this means that we can't now demonstrate a 5-year supply, even though we've been doing what we should be doing and identifying sites where we can. Using that standard methodology, including the beneficial ratio for student and other accommodation, we think that the current assessment of housing supply is 4.7 years. That assessment will be revised over this summer. It's quite important to know that that will be addressing the current consultation we've got out at the moment, you approved, with looking at the local plan, looking at sites, so that's out with landowners, seeing what other sites may come forward. It's also seeing how we may be able to overcome constraints on development, and obviously many speak for themselves. However, there's also a thing in that the government is expecting us to be far more strict with ourselves about the test of deliverability and whether these sites are actually going to crystallise into housing development. Therefore, I can't say to you now that we could expect this position to be any better anytime soon. What we'll be doing is we'll be reviewing that long list of sites, that assessment sites, following the current consultation to see, A, we might get some more sites, but B, we need to be more realistic about delivery, and we will see where that gets us. But I would not ask members to expect we're going to get to 5 years anytime soon. So that leaves us in the current position. And what that is that not having a 5-year supply of housing has an immediate impact for how we determine planning applications, with far more emphasis on the National Planning Policy Framework. This is a particularly bespoke and detailed element of the planning system that warrants and requires specific training for planning committee. And therefore our intention is to run a bespoke session with planning committee to ensure that this is accurately and correctly addressed in the determining of future planning applications, because this is a legal and procedural point that we must get right. And therefore, as a point of detail, we talk to the chair of planning committee and intend to be running the session before the next planning committee in April, because they need to understand and be seen to be addressing that point before they determine their next application where housing supply is an issue. I think for now, all I would just say in the round is that this is placing Portsmouth in a position that many other authorities in Hampshire have been for a little while with housing supply. However, it is the case that we are where we are and that we need to now be focused on national planning policy until such time as we can bring forward a new local plan with all of the other requirements, constraints and technical issues that entails. So it's national planning policy is our first port of call.
So, Toby, can I ask just a quick, this is happening to us because we did the local plan based on what the government said the rules were at that time. But the government has now changed those rules and therefore said the plan that we brought forward, even though it did work under their previous rules, now don't work under their new rules. The bit I'm struggling with is what's going to be the effect in Portsmouth that people will see? Is this going to mean it's easier to get planning applications through, and if so, for what? If that is so, how can we bring an update to the local plan to bring us back to the 5-year land supply and look to see how we can do that quickly? And thirdly, the government has told us their top priority is that we should be addressing air quality issues. And air quality issues mean, and we've written to the government to say, means that we should be building fewer houses, not more houses, because the more houses you build, the more central heating systems you have, the more cars you have, therefore the more air pollution you have. Where are the different bits of government talking to each other about working out which of their priorities they really want us to address as the top priority? Is it their priority that we should address air quality and therefore reduce development, or is it that their top priority is housing and therefore they don't care about air quality? Because we can't do two things at once. You can't cycle and juggle at the same time. Well, I can't anyway. And we can't do both of those things. So is there any clarity, is there any joined up thinking within government at all over any of this? And if there isn't, what's the practical effect on us?
I'll have a go at the planning side. National Plan policy says that we must identify the needs.
To not have air pollution.
Identify the needs, see what you can deliver. If there are constraints, and they would say that air quality is very much one of those constraints, then you see how they can be overcome, and the extent to which they can be overcome is then in effect what your plan figure is. That's the approach. So the need is the need. You then see if you can overcome the constraints of air quality, the environment, the balance of other competing uses, and then that is what you're left. And that is all in the mix. So there is no pecking order in national plan policy. I can't refer you to something that says that one thing is more critical than the other in that regard.
Because I think people, real members of the public, would be stunned to think that the government is saying to us on the one hand, improve air quality, but on the other hand, build lots more houses. And I think we need to be clear back to government that if you are wanting us to reduce air quality stuff, that we need to be able to reduce the amount of build that's being forced on us, so that there is less housing being built, not more, and that should be down to us locally to decide. Paul, and then I'm then going to hand over to Steve, and I know then we've got the deputations.
I think there is a lack of clarity from government about which takes precedence. From my perspective, I think this is going to be one of the big issues that's played out at a local planning inquiry. But we have, given our position in planning terms on the 5-year land supply and how that plays out under the presumption of sustainable development, that is part of the reason why we are taking the briefing for planning committee, which is being undertaken with a QC, to give us some advice on how to play that. And one of the questions we're going to specifically ask them is how that impacts about the directive on air quality. So we're taking decisions at planning committee on an ongoing basis from an informed position.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That's helpful. So we've got deputations now from Councillor Judith Smythe and Councillor Luke Stubbs. Who wants to go first? Okay, Judith, jump straight in there.
Chair, sorry, before that happens, sorry, I've got to go. I'm sorry, Judith, etc.
The reason I wanted to go first, Chair, is that I wanted to pick up directly from what Gerald was saying. I read this with interest. It is a stunning example of lack of joining up by government, I must say, and a stunning example of how centralised the present central government regime are, and how possibly other things they've been doing over the last 2 years have got in the way of better strategic thinking, but that's by the by. What I think is important is that, first of all, I know that you and Gerald were very much in support of having a cross-party approach to local planning, and I think this makes it even more important that we do, because it's a very long-term plan here, and if we have silly political differences and interpret evidence differently, then we're going to get ourselves in all sorts of difficulties with communicating with the public and involving the public in decision making. But second of all, picking up from what Gerald said based on air quality, I do think that the climate emergency motion we passed enthusiastically at the full council last time really has to start informing our thinking and our comments, and indeed the minutes we're taking about this kind of thing. The first of all is the point that Gerald's made about we need to know more about what is the effect of building another home on all the environmental issues. But I think equally importantly is how we do it. In particular, our new local plan has got to start having in it, as indeed some of us suggested for the Kingston prison planning application the other day, those of us who are on planning committee, was electric car charging points built into any new development as a requirement, and I realise we can do that only when we've got our local plan agreed. Second of all, higher standards of insulation. We've got very few passive houses, to use one standard in Portsmouth. We could have more solar panels and so forth. And of course, the links with new significant links, which I think are already in our thinking. This isn't, is about links to better public transport and an integrated transport, cycling and walking infrastructure. And I just think we can't afford to have any debates about this kind of thing, particularly about the local plan, without recognising the consequences of what we all rightly agreed at the last full council. And so when I read this, I thought this is an opportunity for us to start to demonstrate what differences that is going to make to our attitude to developments, and indeed to the sort of specific planning guidance that we will want to give to developers in the future, which has got to start now. It can't start in a few years. So that would be the sort of way in which I hope that we're thinking about putting the local plan together. And it would be helpful, I think, in the light of this paper, which is, I mean, the government's been doing this to planning all for years and years, hasn't it? It's not new in that sense, but I do think we need to have a few facts and figures behind the effects on the various measures of our carbon footprint, including, but not exclusively, air quality, of building a home, two homes, whatever it is. There must be some figures about that we could start to employ in other words, prepare very early for our local planning inquiry that we're already to be anticipating answers to questions that we're going to be asked. So, Chair, I hope we can factor that in, and that everybody in the Cabinet is broadly in agreement.
Thank you, Judith. Luke?
Thank you, Chairman. I think that there are two broad takeaways from these documents. One I have to remark on is just how important the provision of student housing has been towards meeting the housing target in recent years. And I have to marvel at the fact that in 2017-18 it contributed more than half of the addition to housing supply. Now, that supply will continue in 2018-19. We know that because those buildings are already completed. And it will continue largely in 1920 as well, with the Co-op building and with Wingfield House. And thereafter, I think it's going to drop quite sharply, and you're down then to perhaps a core level of completions of more like 400. In fact, at one time, I made a point of getting all of the old housing completions all the way back to 1981. And while there were a few twists and turns within that, 400 was very much the average. There were a couple of booms where up towards the top of the market, a lot of flats got built, but generally speaking, it averaged out to 400. And of course, the booms followed by the bust, where it goes to much less than that figure. The other takeaway is the one we just discussed, which is that we now no longer have a 5-year land supply. And this is of profound importance, because not having a 5-year land supply means the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies. That means that local planning policies that restrict the supply of housing carry zero weight, and that means policies such as those that protect employment land, and arguably policies about density as well. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we're going to end up building on Farlington Marshes, say, because that's protected by national legislation, but it's the local policies which protect employment provision in Cotner and Farlington and elsewhere. I strongly suspect that one of the consequences of this is we could see planning applications for residential development on part of their land, and this authority will be in a very weak position if it tried to resist, because it can't demonstrate how it can do its numbers, and that's a new position to be in. I mean, the 5-year land supply test has been running for, I don't know, did it come back in 2012 with the NPPF? I think it did, but it's been running for a while anyway, and this is the first time we're in this position, and it can be quite uncomfortable. I mean, I've certainly seen in more rural and rural fringe authorities, you find greenfield sites that are not allocated in the local plan have to be given planning consent, and if they're not, they go through on appeal. And so you end up with very much an appeal-led system. Now, in terms of our city, it also affects density, because you can legitimately say that, well, there is no more land, so the only way of making up a larger number is to build at higher density on the sites that you do have. And that may come into play in a location such as St James's, and that's going to be very unfortunate if it does. The other thing about future revisions is I'm not at all convinced that the future revisions are going to be favourable, because we're caught up in to a lesser extent, but to the similar situation of Oxford and Cambridge. So Oxford and Cambridge have two of the tightest housing markets in the country, and yet Oxford, under the government's figures, was given a housing target of 0. And the reason it was given a target of 0 is that, well, the formula went that a certain number of students enters per year, the same number left, therefore the net effect is 0. But that disregards the reality that a certain proportion of those students as graduates would like to remain in the city, and so Oxford and Cambridge are going to find their numbers revised up quite considerably. The effects in Portsmouth would be lesser and more muted than that, but I think that you may still see some partial evidence of that. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the consequences of having a large number of university students, which I have always said I think is a very good thing for the city, but in terms of this formula, whether it might have an effect of pushing up that number somewhat further. I do have to disagree a little bit. Some of the points made about air pollution, for the obvious reasons that the big cities in this country have higher levels of pollution than here. Most noticeably London. Well, London has a housing target of about 50,000 per year. I've yet to hear anyone say that should be all met by building an open countryside. So you either have to accept that you have to have housing in cities or not. But you know, we are not the most polluted city in this country, not by a long way. All the West Midlands boroughs, apart from Coventry, are in worse shape than we are as well, as is Southampton. And of course, you know, so you could have a situation where Southampton councils say, well, we're too polluted, meet the numbers in Portsmouth instead because that's cleaner. So it's a sort of risky game going down that one. I guess I'd like to hear a bit more, you know, from the officers about what the presumption is going to mean. I suspect it's going to mean potential loss of industrial sites, potential higher densities, and that we'll be on a weaker position on appeal. I don't know if it's going to have any effect on housing multiple occupation policies, because I don't think that changes the housing number either way. So I'm going to guess that it won't, but I don't know that, and it will be good to have some thoughts on that.
Thank you, Luke. Toby, would you like to pick up on a few of the points that Luke and Judith made there? I'm particularly interested in the knowing whether HMOs have any impact on that. I don't believe they do they?
At present, no, they don't. So, you know, going from a family home to an HMO and back again does not impact on those overall headline targets, although they're obviously clearly meeting different types of housing need in the city. Yep.
And Councillor Stubbs, as far as I know, is right in the points that he made around the potential impact on the city of this happening. Is this 4.77 years land supply effective as the calculation figure immediately? Do we get any opportunity whatsoever to ask for a stay of applications, since the government's spent a year mucking about trying to come up with an answer and we're in the middle of redoing our local plan?
No, it's with immediate effect. It's new evidence, so that's got to be factored in immediately with our new planning decisions undertaken by Planning Committee.
Okay, and for clarity, does that apply to applications that are made from today or from a certain date, or any that were in train? Where are we at with that?
Decisions from today, in effect.
Okay, thank you.
What happens about applications that have been deferred for one reason or other?
Forgive me, yes, it's if you make a planning decision from the moment that was the position, then that is the rules of the game, if you like. It is MPPF looking at those impacts.
Am I right in saying that we don't have the opportunity to do any amendment to the existing local plan that can help us with this?
It wouldn't be quicker than bringing forward a new local plan, is my advice. Yep.
And can we have an update on the expected publication date for the new local plan?
Sure, so the current timetable is that we aim to be out with a draft plan at the end of this year.
With a view to confirming it?
In early summer next year. But we did always say we would be taking a report to members in the summer after this consultation, we're mapping out clearer the future work that needed to be done.
There's a dangerous gap. You can, Luke.
Which is, I understand that local plans have to look forward 15 years. If this isn't going to be adopted till next summer, that would take you into the middle of 35, and I always thought this plan was going to run to the end of 34.
Just a small point, but we have actually extended the plan period so it runs to 2036. That was a cabinet decision previously.
That's right, we confirmed that earlier. Colleagues, any questions? Lynn?
Yes, it's not just about building extra houses in cities, it's about the lack of transport infrastructure to cope with it. And that in turn leads to increased traffic, increased air pollution. Even if you clean up the air, which eventually we will do, but it's a long process. But also it's the congestion that is on the roads. And that is a loss of money for the local economy as well, because I can't remember the figure, but it's a huge, for every minute you're held up on the roads, it's a loss of X number of £1 million, etc. I've just chaired a meeting of the South East Hants Rapid Transport Group, which is putting in a bid for up to £200 million as part of the Transforming Cities Fund. Now, a lot of that money is going to be dealing with the problems we've got at the moment with the existing transport problems, let alone what we've got in the future. I mean, for example, this doesn't apply to Portsmouth, but for South East Hants, for example, they're dealing with Wellbourne. There's no planned transport infrastructure going in there, and also the area around Waterlooville. Massive expansions, and if we want to get people onto public transport, you've got to have the road transport network that gets people to the places that they don't have to take a car to wherever they need to get the public transport and so forth. And public transport is one of the answers to some of the problems of traffic issues and so forth. And there's no joined up thinking. Now, this one thing that drives me nuts in planning. If we object to something on the grounds of this, that and the other, the developers will appeal, and they'll go to Bristol, who will uphold the appeal, and then we get fined. So if we're, for genuine reasons, for example, the prison development, I objected to it on transport grounds, yet there's going to be up to 370 additional cars, something like that, that are going to be on that particular roundabout. That is not taken into consideration, so you're going to have major problems there. So whoever does DEFRA, Department of Transport Planning, they need to actually talk to each other occasionally, and have a joined up plan, and that's not happening. And it's not just here in the city, it's across the country. South East Hants and also Southampton are having the same problem with Southampton and Hampshire bid for this Transforming Cities Fund. So, thank you. We need to put in a strong, I think, protest or push central government, because, we are the ones who are suffering from it. Yeah.
I think we all agree we've had far too long governments looking at the next election and not the next generation. But Darren?
Steve, if I may ask the team a couple of questions, and then whenever anyone else has asked a question, I want to come back with some comments on some possible ways forward, if I may, Steve. Toby, how many homes a year can the city theoretically cope with?
What we have done at the moment is we've published a capacity study that sets out, in accordance with the identified sites at the moment, what they could deliver. However, that's not a policy statement that addresses things such as transport, community infrastructure, schools, or the rest. That work has not been done. We're still undertaking that. It will be the job of the plan, when we publish a draft plan, to actually come to that view as to what the right level of development can and should be achieved in the city over 15 years. We're not in a position at the moment to answer that question fully.
The reason I mention that, Toby, is that in a previous report when we were discussing the local plan, there was a line in the report which said the then statement of housing need, which was the push statement of housing need, was more than the city could theoretically cope with. So I'm guessing that the 863 total that's been imposed on us by government is nowhere near or far above the level that we can theoretically cope with as a city. That is correct, is it not, Toby?
Yes, our starting point with our current understanding of the capacity of the city on its own is that we're something like just under 3,000 homes away over the planned period. So even if we are able to overcome the sort of constraints we've talked about today, we still can't see a way through to meeting that identified need figure of 863 a year.
Thank you for that clarification. In the housing team, the team is looking at building homes on land we own in Havant, and a reasonable number of them, to help deal with the issue. This is Portsmouth City Council land in Havant. Now, I know those plans, but presumably when it comes to the targets that we've got and the 5-year land supply, that's not included in what you've got here. Am I correct?
Today that very much is the case. However, as we bring forward our local plan and as Havant finalises its local plan, which is currently out for consultation, the extent to which those documents record any element to which housing is being delivered in Havant, if you like, counts towards anything we can't meet, will be reflected in the future assessments of where we are with our supply, if that makes sense.
When we take the local plan through its process, if there is, and I don't know the figures, if there are 2,000 houses for Portsmouth residents being delivered in Havant, we have to have that documented through the local plan process, and that will enable us under the duty to cooperate to demonstrate that we are meeting our housing needs. We don't necessarily have to meet those figures entirely within our own boundaries, but we have to demonstrate where that additional requirement can be met.
Thank you, Paul. That's one task for my next meeting sorted then. In Milton, we have a neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan is likely to be in a shape where planning committee colleagues can give it some weight before the local plan. That's the current estimate. Again, in terms of development there, because that affects St James's and the Langston campus sites, how does that have an impact on the situation that you're outlining today? Either Toby or Paul, to answer that, please.
As I understand it, although it's not yet with us formally, but the Milton Neighbourhood Plan does not set a housing figure for the Milton area. Therefore, it's all really to be considered in terms of individual planning applications and how that is best to be managed. In other words, if there's a lack of housing supply in this area, then there's a lack of housing supply in this area.
So, and I just want to finish this, Steve, if I may. So, strangely enough, in terms of individual applications, that sounds to me as that actually may have more significance in terms of planning applications in the neighbourhood plan area, given that effectively the local plan has to be superseded by the MPPF, than the local plan will. Have I got that wrong? So the Milton plan is of more significance for developments in the plan area than the local plan would be. Have I got that wrong when it gets started? That's when the plan gets started in Milton.
Forgive me. Any planning application within the Milton area, once the Milton Neighbourhood Plan's in place, would be determined with reference to both the city local plan and the Milton Neighbourhood Plan. However, until the Milton Neighbourhood Plan gets to a certain point, we are where we are with looking at national planning policy, same as we are with the city plan in effect.
So thank you for that, Toby, and thank you for your indulgence, Steve.
That's all right, Jeanette.
Yeah, thank you. I have quite a lot of concerns, not about the report and not about what you've said, but when you've got housing delivery test results in front of you that are slightly fudged by student accommodation, people who are on the housing waiting list don't give a flying fig that it's student accommodation. All they know is they haven't got a home. So how are we really going to address that? The other point that I have concerns is we pass things at full council about climate change. And that should now be driving every single thing and every single decision we make, including the local plan. And it doesn't seem to be. We have to do radical change, and we're still going on the same way we've always gone on. And it's bits here, bits there, local plan here, whatever. And that disappoints me, because this is now our chance to tackle air quality, tackle the homeless situation, tackle affordable housing, social housing, and student accommodation is being built. There's nothing we can do about that, but that can't cloud the fact that we are failing our residents because we can't provide housing for them. We need to address the car issue. Whether there are arguments about parking or all sorts of things, we have to move away from the car. It's about public transport and everything else. So the local plan has to join all these things up, now knowing we have bad air quality, knowing we've got a problem with too many cars on the road, knowing we haven't got enough homes, and we're missing a golden opportunity. And someone once said to me, don't waste a good crisis, David. So please don't waste a good crisis.
I think it's a fair point, Jeanette. Toby, could you just let us know whether the resolution made at full council will impact on the development of the local plan?
Can I pick that up, Steve? Yes, it will. We're aware of that, and that's part of the reason why we're setting up the local plan, cross-member local plan working party, to ensure that all these evidence streams, all these discussions come in, and they drive forward the planning policy into the future.
Thank you, Paul. Any further comments from colleagues? Darren.
Thank you, Steve. The crunch has come. It's as simple as that. We've been said for years that eventually, because we are constrained, and look, we're more constrained than Oxford or Cambridge or London, in part because most of the city is an island, so therefore we've got a geographical constraint that goes on, and we've got a lot of protected open space that we need to keep. Although I understand the issues that you raise about the markets in all three, because we do face similar problems, we're even more constrained than those, but the crunch has simply come. And what makes me angry about this is that this is a government, and Judith was very polite about the government, this is a government simply paralysed by Brexit, which is unable to get one hand to talk to the other. Now, where I'm from in Lamport, that normally means the backside not talking to the elbow. But essentially, you've got on the one hand, the Department for Transport and DEFRA going, you have to tackle air pollution, and on the other hand, you've got a government, you've got a Ministry of Housing going, essentially this is a developer free-for-all. Because if you can explain to me what sustainable development means, this is now the acid test of the argument when the MPPF was set up around what is sustainable development. We are now the test case. Because sustainability means it doesn't clog our streets. It means it doesn't choke our children. It also means that we have to provide homes that people can afford. I know we've had a discussion previously about council house building, and you cannot build your way out of a crisis. And if you didn't believe you can build your way out of the housing situation in this city, here's your proof. Because we have now hit that crisis point. And it really frustrates me that we have artificial targets imposed by government that we can't cope with, as Toby's just outlined. We just don't have the room. Otherwise we start building on Milton Common, we start building on Farlington Marshes, we start building on protected open space, everything that makes people want to have our city as a community, not concrete, everything around that. And yet now we're faced with a real problem of government departments not talking to each other and not thinking about the consequences for people, because they're paralysed by, as some politely described it, other things. Yet we have to live with this situation, and we have to find a way out of the situation. And I would want, ideally, Steve, I would want a pretty detailed explanation of of the officer's interpretation of what sustainable development actually means for Hugh Mason, for Judith, and for other planning committee colleagues before their next meeting, because this is the test. And it's going to have to stand up and appeal. And I fear with the current government approach that the word sustainable may not be as green as it could be. So that makes me highly worried. The other bit of the paper that really intrigues me is one of the tables, and it's a table around affordable housing market completions. And as per usual, I can't find the number. I can't find the table. But it's a table in the Authority Monitoring Report which shows the lack of affordable housing that has been approved at Planning Committee since 2014, which has been, here we are, the table is on page 48, I waffled for long enough. So from 2014-15 to 2017-18, 87, there's 124 affordable housing units were secured. That's 124 over 4 years. There's another 49 that were proposed to be affordable, so that's 182. That's less than were approved in 2012-2013. In the paragraph above that, 3.3.29, it says in 2017-18, this up to March 2018, the total number of affordable housing units built in Portsmouth was 46. This is not a great position, colleagues. But again, it shows that we all have to do things together, and that's why it's important that we have homes Portsmouth people can afford, and that's why, for instance, the only redeeming feature of the prison site is that we are now working with Vivid Homes to provide 187 of them. But I suggest people, colleagues who want to find homes Portsmouth people can afford, read that table and weep. So, we have a situation we don't want to be in. We have artificial targets which are now from government, which are creating a really difficult situation for our city, and I would propose an additional recommendation, Steve, if I may, which is recommendation 4, which is to endorse the administration's view, this is in the letter Gerald has sent to DEFRA and DFT, that the government's artificial housing targets be replaced by a target reflecting local housing need and local sustainable development, in line with government, the government's desire for us to tackle air pollution and the fact we are in a climate emergency. It's a small sop for the situation that we're in, but unfortunately it's the best we can do. I cannot say I am pleased. I thank you for your indulgence with me, Steve. This is the only time I have got angry since we resumed power last May, and I'm angry because the crunch has come. We now face a real situation, and we face a government which on the one hand wants us to build more homes than we can afford, and on the other wants to make sure our children don't choke and our city isn't clogged up. And those two things don't go together, and it's about time we made sure they did. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so colleagues, got a proposal from Darren. Lynn?
Yes, can we add transport infrastructure that can cope with the increased amount of housing? Because I think that is vitally important. The air pollution is directly linked to the transport.
I'm happy to add on the end for Joanne's benefit, and the need for proper transport infrastructure, not least because I'm really worried that the situation now will mean that any future developments at St James's may be more than the roads can cope with.
Can I just add that actually the transport infrastructure is there already, and it's additional things that come to it that the transport infrastructure can't cope with. We can't build any more roads unless we knock down lots of houses, which is a bit counterproductive, you know. So I think that's the important thing, that it's got to be the amount of housing that the transport infrastructure can support. Yeah? Okay, thank you.
I was going to chuck in that the government also ought to stump up the money to protect two nationally important historic assets in Southsea Castle and Long Curtain Moat while they're at it, because all we seem to get is an endless narrative of not joined up thinking and not very clever behaviour by people who are sat miles away and don't even seem to realise that Portsmouth was largely an island, but we'll spare them the amendment that. Joe, have you got a formal word you could read back to us? That's what I was worried about.
I'll liaise with Councillor Sanders.
Fine.
I'm happy to read it out for the 48th time.
No, you're fine. We'll let Joe deal with that afterwards. Colleagues, are you all happy with the additional recommendation that Councillor Sanders wishes to add? I call no reason why we can't add that recommendation. Okay, all in favour? Okay, and all in favour of the other recommendations that are already in the report, unless anyone has got any further to add? No? Thank you very much indeed. That concludes that item. Judith?
I think that was a splendid debate.
Judith, you need to use a mic if you're talking, because otherwise we won't get it on the record.
I'd like to draw attention, Chair, as we've got the forward planning team here with us, that this does mean a very different sort of public consultation will have to be done on the local plan from what we've done in the past.
because we won't be able to get the recommendation that Councillor Sanders has put through today unless there's pretty good understanding among our citizenry that this is what is the Council's view. And again, this is the first, if you like, of many struggles that are going to be in trying to get the climate emergency recommendations through. And I think that's another reason why it would be good to have a meeting with the local planning inter-party group, which you've very kindly agreed to set up, so that we could have some conversations about the sort of consultation we needed to have to help the public join up all these things.
Yes, I don't think they're going to need to send from us about that. Since last May, we've consulted a record number of people about the Council's budget proposals. We massively expanded the consultations around the proposals for the sea defences. We've already had consultation events around the potential for a super peninsula, etc., off Tipner. Of course, this will be included. We've had consultation drop-in events on the Seafront Master Plan. I think when you add all that together, this year this administration has consulted with more people in this city than any other one it probably has ever, and that's feedback from our colleagues in comms who are telling me that we get record responses for everything, including the recent consultation we did about the public realm improvements to where the former Drift in the City site was, which was 100% positive feedback and deemed to be probably a unique experience in that event. So we will of course do that, and we will do it not because we've been asked to, but because it's something we would automatically want to do. Okay, next item on the agenda, folks, is the SIL adjustment, which is found on pages 105 to 110 of the papers. And Chris, are you presenting on this? Mr. Chris Ward, then, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chris, we will have a deputation for Judith to follow your report. And we won't.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this report concerns what's fondly described as citywide SIL. So what that means is that any SIL receipt that's received for a development that is deemed to be a significant development and is over £1 million in value. So, or where the SIL receipt is over £1 million in value. So there's the existing policy which is really embedded within the current budget and policy framework, which enables any SIL for such a significant development in its totality to go into what we'd probably describe as the single capital pot or the corporate pool. And then that is available to be spent and determined by the City Council. There's an alternative proposal within this report that suggests that you might want to reflect on that policy choice and accept a proposal that is more akin to what happens to developments that generate less than £1 million worth of SIL, which suggests that the first 150,000 of a development that would generate £1 million SIL should go to the neighbourhood in the same way as all of those developments that generate a receipt of less than £1 million do. So it's a genuine policy choice. If you were to adopt what's described in the report as option 2, then it would bring consistency with the current policy for those developments that generate SIL of less than £1 million, although the consequence of that would obviously be that there's less money available to go into the corporate pot and to be decided to be allocated on a non-ring-fenced basis. So it's over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. A question from me. Under the current rules for smaller developments, am I right in thinking it's linked to the number of units that are going to be developed?
It is generally linked to the number of units, yes.
So this won't be, is that correct?
Not in its entirety, because it depends on the overall level of SIL to be generated, because there's a cap on the proposal which says it can't go beyond 150,000, which effectively says it's the first £1 million of SIL. So if there was a development that generated £2 million worth of SIL, then only 150,000 would go to the neighbourhood element. the balance would fall into into the current regime and be available in the, if you like, the single capital pot, and be available to the council to determine more freely how it would look like to allocate that fund.
Okay, so just for clarity for the one person who may be watching, are we able to confirm then that this change will not artificially inflate the amount of money going towards SIL that would go to it if it was a smaller development? In other words, we're not giving more per unit to the ward SIL than we would be otherwise.
No, in actual fact, in almost in every single case, unless the SIL receipt was exactly £1 million, you'd be given less.
Thank you, that's what I thought. Colleagues, any questions, Darren?
No questions, just some comments, Steve, if I may. This is very welcome, and I think the compromise that's been put forwards was pretty much, Lynn and I are the only two survivors of when this was first decided 5-6 years ago, who are here, but I think this is precisely what we wanted to do 6 years ago, which was to make sure all neighbourhoods, local communities benefit from all developments that exist without necessarily totally destroying the need for major developments actually to have citywide benefits around key areas. So this to me is, this rights the wrongs of 6 years ago. I'm disappointed that nothing has happened over the last 4.5-5 years about it. I'm delighted something's finally happening, and I think it's a very suitable compromise. My only suggestion would be that the procedure will take effect from when any payments start on the 1st of April 2020 as opposed to any decisions that are taken. I think that's the spirit of what's in here, but because it won't affect any decisions, it will only affect when the payments turn up. Anything that's paid after the 1st of April 2020, I would suggest is subject to this new and excellent compromise. Thank you, Steve.
Chris, could you just confirm that?
Yeah, just to clarify, what we're seeking to avoid is causing a problem with the existing capital programme, because the existing capital programme relies on the 4 SIL receipts that are embedded within this report. So in terms of our overall capital planning process, if we recognise this from 1st of April next year, then we shouldn't cause a problem within the existing capital programme. So that's the reason for the date, because we've already passed the point where the council has determined how it wants to allocate its capital resources.
The date wasn't the problem, it was just to make sure it's from when the payments start from then, as opposed to any decisions that are taken from then, recognising the 4 schemes already in the programme. So that's why the date is a good one.
Lynn?
Yes, I welcome this. I was very cross, like Darren was when the still money from the prison was we're not going to get anything in Baffins. And we've got an area, coming back to one of the other items on the agenda about the youth programme. One of the things, I've talked to a lot of local kids in Baffins, and the one thing, the boys in particular, and I'm not being sexist here, I mean it's literally the way they fed back, one of the things that they would like is a BMX track, and we have got some space where we could do that. I'm not saying we would do it, but we'd need that amount of money to be able to do it. There's no money obviously in the general coffers for that sort of thing, but that's the sort of thing that we could spend the money on that would take a lot of these kids off the streets where they're causing antisocial behaviour, because there's very little available for that 13 to 18-year-old age group, and this takes a lot of their energy and so forth, so I welcome it.
Okay, colleagues, any other questions? No? We're all happy with that? Recommendation 2? Yes, approved. And I think, unless Joe tells me otherwise, that concludes today's business. Thank you all for coming.